Here we are in the busy metropolis of Richmond, opposite a Medicare Centrelink office. It's going to be noisy, but I'm going to shout so you're going to hear me, because what I have to say may have some impact on you, and I'm sure it will. Because contrary to popular expectations, all of us, in one way or another, rely on the government to receive essential services, not just security services, but essential services. The great thing about living in Australia was that through the sacrifices of our fathers, grandfathers, and many other people living in this country, we were able to force the state to take on the responsibility of caring for our fellow citizens and residents in times of need. And a number of important social innovations have been made over the last 60 or 70 years, which have had a profound impact on the way that we have lived. And these include the establishment of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in the 1920s, the establishment of Medibank, which is now called Medicare, in 1973 by the Whitlam-led Labor government, the establishment of single parents benefits for unmarried mothers by the Whitlam Labor government. There was no support for women who had children out of wedlock before the Whitlam Labor government in 73. The establishment of disability support pensions, old age pensions, Newstart allowance, irrespective of how miserable it is in 2019, and also the establishment of the National Insurance Disability Scheme by the Gillard Labor government. It's interesting to see that most of these social innovations were introduced by Labor governments, not Liberal National Party governments. Now, unfortunately, during the last 40 years, or 40 plus years, during the deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation revolution, there have been forces in this country, in both of the major political parties and many of the minor parties, whose job it has been to try to destroy these important social innovations which were established to provide basic services to all Australians, irrespective of their income. The first one I want to talk about is Medicare. Over the last 20 years, under both Labor and Liberal governments, the concept of Medicare, a universal insurance scheme which ensures that all Australians, irrespective of income, have access to basic medical care, has been subverted by governments, especially by this Liberal National Party government, which has now been in power for 6 years. And they've done this through a variety of ways. There is no way they would try to abolish Medicare, but because it's a particularly popular social initiative which assists all Australians, irrespective of income. So what they've done is a number of things. The most important thing is they've actually strangled the system in terms of underpaying doctors for the services they provide. What this has led to is no increase in GP rebates for 5 years, a recent increase of 1.5%. And the purpose behind this was very simple. It was to bankrupt private medical doctors who bulk billed all their patients. The government that introduced legislation about 5 years ago which paid a GP extra for seeing somebody on some type of social security benefit, and downgraded the amount of payment for seeing somebody who wasn't on a social security benefit, irrespective of whether they were working poor or not. So through these initiatives, what we call 1,000 cuts, a policy of 1,000 cuts, what they're hoping to do is drive medical practices and people back into the private health insurance industry. So Medicare itself in 2019 is a shadow of the organisation it was when it was established in 1973. And this is a specific government policy which pushes the private sector always ahead of the public sector and denigrates the public sector. The second sector I'd like to talk about is public education. Now, public education, Victoria was the first place in the world that in 1872 introduced 3 compulsory secular education. In 2019, there is no such thing as free secular education. The compulsory is still there, but the free and isn't. Most parents who send children to preschool, primary school and high school, irrespective of their financial situations, are now forced to pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for services which should be provided by the government at the state and federal level. More importantly, what we've seen over the last 40 years since the loss of the High Court case by the Defence of Government School Organisation, which said, the High Court said, I think it was in 1986, that it's constitutional for the Commonwealth Government to fund private schools. What we have seen is this huge gap developing between public and private schools. I'll give you a simple example, and this gap isn't just a matter of fees, it's a matter of Commonwealth and state government support for the private school sector. Two of the richest schools in this country, Wesley College and Halbury College, mainly based in Victoria, have spent over $100 million each on development of their school, capital development, buildings, swimming pools, equestrian centres, cafes, golf courses for their students. And most of this money has come from the public purse via the Commonwealth Government. At the same time, we have 1,500 public schools that between 2013 and 2017 received less than $100,000 each, that's $25,000 a year, for maintenance and capital development of those schools. So again, we see the private sector being supported by the public sector at the expense of poorer people in the community. So it's a question of having the best healthcare that money can buy, and the best healthcare that the best education money can buy. For example, with private health insurance, almost 50%, $6 billion per year, is given as a gift to the private health insurance industry, again from the taxpayer's pocket. So you are seeing billions of dollars of taxpayers' money which should be used to provide public education and health facilities for everybody, irrespective of income, now being diverted to the private sector. Now, the other thing I'd like to look at is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The National Disability Insurance Scheme was established after 40 years of agitation. I was involved in the very beginning of a campaign which involved thousands of people across the country, which put enough pressure on the government, the federal government, to introduce a National Disability Insurance Scheme. Before the introduction of a National Disability Insurance Scheme for people with disability, which will cover over 450,000 Australians, if you had the resources or you're compensated for your injury, you are in a position to have the best care possible. Otherwise, you would have to rely on charity or your family or inadequate social security payments. So the National Disability Insurance Scheme was introduced in 2011 to overcome that problem and give everybody with a disability access to assistance from the federal government. So what has this federal government done? Because the bulk of this scheme has been built during the Morrison, the unfunded empathy Prime Minister's term of office, and his predecessors, Turnbull and Abbott. And what have they done? They've put a cap on the number of workers working in the field to process applications in order to slow down the development of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. They have hired unqualified people with no experience to do the assessments. They've done everything they can to prevent the 420 to 450,000 Australians who have illegal access to the scheme from actually applying to the scheme. And we now see the minister, the current federal minister, saying that he's going to hold another investigation into the rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, last year, the government's surplus, which helped them win the last election this year, was built on the back of unspended funds which had been allocated to the National Disability Insurance Scheme via
a lack of processing of applicants. So once again, we see a government applying 1,000 cuts and bleeding a resource which should provide benefits to the most disadvantaged and exploited Australians. We go on to the legal system, legal aid. When legal aid was first introduced, interestingly, during the Whitlam Labor government, the number of people who got access to legal aid for a variety of criminal and civil offences has dramatically decreased. And in 2019, we've gone back to the good old days when, again, if you got money, you've got a good legal defence. Justice isn't blind. If you go to the county court in Victoria, the privatised county court in Victoria, look at justice at her scales and her blindfold. If you slip in a few dollars into the scales, it really will assist your campaign. So we've got Medicare, we have public education, we have public health insurance, we have private health insurance, we have legal aid, and the list goes on. Then we come to Centrelink. The privatisation of the responsibility of the government to provide services to people who are down on their luck, who find themselves incapable of being part of the paid workforce because they're too ill, they're too sick, they've got too many responsibilities as far as being a single parent, or they're too old. What has happened to the social security system over the last 40 years is little more than a disaster. People who need assistance are now being treated as criminals. We talk about welfare dependency. We talk about people being on the dole. We talk about welfare cheats, when the real cheats in our society when it comes to billions of dollars is the corporate sector. We've seen a wholesale denigration of human beings who require support for the very reason that they require support. So what we see is a cultural shift and a cultural change, where somehow people think they will never have to rely on social security benefits to survive. It doesn't take much of a disaster for you to have to rely on social security benefits to survive. And then what we now have is the wholesale privatisation of services, where you now have private corporations, and they are corporations of the nature concerned whether religious based or non-religious based, making decisions about who will be on a particular benefit, when they can be suspended, and the list goes on and on. And the work for the dole scheme is a little short, of a tragedy, a postmodern tragedy. So in every important pillar of society that has been built through the struggle and blood, sweat and tears of future generations and through public money, we have seen a campaign of what I would describe as political mutilation. The problem is not with the staff who are trying to run these schemes. The problem isn't with the recipients or the people who need the services. The problem lies wholly and solely in the lap of governments of all political persuasions who have swallowed the hook that the way to obtain a decent society is through the private sector. How can a sector that relies on making a profit irrespective of the human, social, environmental, social and national needs of a country, how can such a system provide a service? Look at the disaster in aged care, the privatisation of aged care, and what's happened to that sector. Look at the disaster regarding public housing and the inability of both state and federal governments to actually address the problem of housing affordability, let alone the problem of homelessness. And to a significant degree, we are responsible for this. If one thing the last election result taught me is that people still want to ape their masters. They still want to ape the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. When people, say that free dental care and free care for patients with cancer isn't important. What's more important is a $10 a week tax refund if you're lucky enough to have a job, or giving a landlord or an investor a tax break through negative gearing, or giving a shareholder a gift from the government, which will roll up to about $60 billion in about 10 years' time, which will be about 20% of the budget. And because they own a share, you begin to realise that we have forgotten as a people what is important. And you may feel richer, but the reality is we may have more gadgets, but we have more bills to pay. We're spending most of our lives on a treadmill like a rat, going round and round and round. And the beauty of life in the second decade, the end of the second decade of the 21st century, is we now have the whole family on that treadmill. It's not just one wage earner who's sacrificed as a wage slave to ensure the bills are paid, but we have, say, 2 or 3 adult members in a household, plus the children being left behind because there isn't enough money, isn't enough resources to provide the best healthcare money can buy, to provide the best education money can buy, to provide the best legal defence money can buy, to provide the best disability care money can buy. And the list goes on and on and on. This is an important issue, and it will not change until we as a country, we as people, put the welfare of each and every one of us, especially those in a less fortunate position, before the welfare of the corporate sector, who rely on government handouts in terms of tens of billions of dollars in order to make their profits. And if there's one statistic, and I know facts don't matter in the 21st century, it's all about feeling and emotions. Facts are irrelevant. There is one figure in the 21st century which highlights what's happened in this country in the last 40 years. 40 years ago, if you're an investor and you invested $1, you would receive a return. Any profit that was made from that dollar, 1/3 would go to you, 2/3 would go to the person who did the work to create that profit. Today, in 2019, if you're an investor and you invest $1, any profit that's made, 2/3 of that profit goes to the investor, 1/3 goes to the worker. That's why we have wage stagnation. That's why we have these huge levels of debt, and that's why we as a people find ourselves in this situation. So again, I keep telling you, I love tennis. The ball's in your court. It's up to you. We can continue down this path and have armed guards on every corner, concierges in every building, and we could look at each other as potential enemies, or we can change things in a hurry. So the ball's in your court. Think about what's happening. Instead of blaming the provider of the service, blame the people who've passed the laws which have allowed these essential, critical building block, national building blocks to be slowly destroyed through a campaign of what I describe as political mutilation. Next week, maybe we'll have a pleasant issue. Who knows? Maybe I'll talk about the birds and the bees.